Okay, let's look at using colors in Illustrator. So I have this rectangle that I've created. Okay, so when you change the colors on an object, first you want to have it selected, of course. And uh, to see the colors of the object, or to know what they are, you look down the bottom of the toolbar. And here we can see white fill and a black stroke or a black outline around the edge of the object. The one that any object has those two parameters that can be colored, fill or stroke. So the one that we're currently coloring is the one that's in front. So if you watch down here in the bottom of my toolbar, if I click on the stroke, that's the color I'm editing. If I click on the fill, that's the color I'm editing. The little double-ended arrow up here right above it, that swaps the two colors, but doesn't change the one you're editing, if that makes sense. So let's just look at changing the fill color first. So if I just double click on the fill color, I get a regular, this is a standard Adobe color picker. And in the default configuration, you can change the configuration by clicking in these buttons down on the lower right, but the default configuration works fine. There's really no reason to change that. So I can change the hue is in the ramp here. Now what this shows here is the before color and the after color. Just changing the hue doesn't actually change the color. People always do this, they slide this thing up and down and they say, okay, and wonder why it's still white. It's still white because the actual color is the little dot that's out here and it's up there in white. And if I change the hue, but don't give it saturation or blackness, it's still gonna be white. So you move this little dot around here. If you want it to be fully saturated, just drag it up to that corner. You don't have to put it, don't worry, you can't lose it in the corner, right? Just drag it right up there. So now it's fully saturated, pink, say, and okay, there it is, that color. So I can mix that color just by double clicking on my fill swatch or my fill area. We also have the swatch palette. If I just click on a swatch, the selected object changes color, right? And also, normally you select an object to color it, but I can also drag a swatch onto an unselected object to color it. And it's going to color the fill, not the stroke, because the fill is what's currently in front, right? So we have our swatches, and if let's say I mix some color I like here over here in this area, I can just drag it right into the swatch palette. If you don't see the swatch palette for whatever reason, you should in the Essentials class, but if you don't, just Window and swatches. Okay, so we have the swatch palette where we can store colors, and we also have the color palette, okay, which may look a little different than mine, but we can look at how to change its configuration. Now, one thing, I don't know why, but this black that's in the default swatch palette is actually sort of a dark gray. Okay, see, it's not all the way in black. If you want full black, true black, it's the one up in the color palette. So this has this color ramp here, which I don't actually find super useful. It's a little bit vague. So I changed this. Now, every palette has a palette menu. Okay, if you look in the upper right corner, there's a little 3 lines there, hamburger menu, that's called. And if you click on that, each palette has one, right? If you click on that, we can do show options, and it shows it in a different way. The ramp is still down there, but we have these 3 sliders. So the default way the sliders work is RGB, red, green, and blue, which seems like would make sense. I mean, the monitor is an RGB device, our eyes are RGB, but it's kind of hard to think in RGB. Like, if I turn up 100%, let's see, what's a good example? 100% red and 100% green, I get yellow. I mean, it's just not a kind of mixing that's easy to, how to find something that's almost black. It's hard to find it with these sliders. So what I do is I go there and change it to HSB, hue, saturation, and blackness. It's the same 3 things that we had in the color picker, right? So I just keep this all set like this all the time. When you're in the academic support center, they have some software installed there that makes the machines go back to the default configuration or um, to the way they were set up every time the machine reboots. So you'll have to always adjust this if you want it this way, or leave it alone. But I find this most convenient. So we have our color palette, our swatch palette, and right here we can adjust colors. Okay. So let's then look at the stroke color. So I'm going to bring that to the front, and now I'm, say, going to put red on there. Okay. It's a little hard to see that that's red because when it's selected, the bounding box kind of covers that thin 1-point stroke. So let's give it a fatter stroke. So down below the swatch palette, you should see the stroke palette. Okay. And that also has a lot more options in it. You can put arrowheads, dotted lines, different kinds of corners and stuff like that. But I'm just going to hide the options again because I only want to change. I only want to change the point size. So I'm going to make this say. Now, whenever you have a bunch of presets like this, like it'll give you a bunch of choices, 16, 18, 20. You're not, those are just preset options. You can always just type in, if I want 15, okay, I can type in 15 or 8 points, whatever I want. Points, lines and type we usually measure in points. And if you go to Word or something like a PowerPoint or whatever, it's the same thing, 14-point type or a 1-point line. Everything else we measure in inches, probably. So there's my stroke, and it's just the same. I can double click on it, change that color. Okay. If I want to go back to editing the fill, I just have to bring that back in front. So this is something people always forget when they're working in Illustrator, is which one of these things is in front here. It's just something you have to always be mindful of. A few other things, if you want to have no stroke, okay, so you bring the stroke to the front, that's what we're editing. And right below there, there's a little red slash, okay? Don't try to make a super tiny stroke that you can't see or anything, just turn it off, okay? So now there's no stroke. If I want to turn the stroke back on, over on the opposite side is, to turn the color on. Now, for whatever reason, when you turn it off and on again, it forgets that you changed the stroke weight. I find that somewhat annoying, but that's the way it is. Okay, if I want to turn the fill off, I bring the fill to the front and I hit the red slash. Now, in Illustrator, you can just select an object by clicking on where it exists, right? But if I turn off the fill, there's nothing there, okay? So if I try to drag, it doesn't get it. If you have no fill, then you have to drag by the edge of the object. Or the little dot in the middle. Okay. Other things in this area, there's a little icon that looks like the fill and stroke icon, but it's just black and white. That puts your selected object back to white fill with a 1-point black stroke. Not sure why you'd ever want that. And then there's also a gradient. Okay, so if I have the fill in front and I click on gradient, it gives me a default black to white. But I'm not going to spend too much time on the gradient palette right now, but it's something you could play around with. To get colors in there, you can just drag them from the swatch palette. If I just click on the swatch, it's going to turn to that color. But if I click and drag down to there, now I have orange. Okay, and if I want to change to, say, radial or linear, and I can click on here and drag and make different. You can just click and drag to adjust things to make interesting effects there. Okay, so so that's the gradient, and you can put a gradient on the stroke also. Just going to keep that solid for the moment. So that's just working with colors in Illustrator in general, pretty straightforward. Let's just look at navigating around also while we're here. So if you're working on something small, you want to zoom in. You need to be able to navigate around on the screen. Okay. So then the bottom of the toolbar, there's a zoom tool, looks like a magnifying glass, and a little hand tool for panning left or right. Okay. So if I zoom in, I can just drag with it to zoom in and zoom out. Okay. Now the zoom tool works two different ways. This is what's called scrubby zoom, where I just click and drag with it. It's possible that the old way that it used to work was if you dragged with the magnifying glass, it would make a marquee, and that marquee would blow up to fill it would zoom to fill your screen. That makes sense. I noticed on campus there's some irregularity. Some of the computers seem to do it the old way and some the new way. So I'm just going to show you how to deal with that. I actually kind of like the old way where you drag a marquee because it's kind of just like one shot, boom, I'm zoomed in. But I've sort of gotten used to this because it's the new default. But if I go to Edit, Preferences, and this is an odd place. It's under Performance. Seems kind of weird. And it's called Animated Zoom. So if I just turn that off, okay, now when I take the zoom tool, I drag a marquee, and that area blows up to fill the screen. Okay, so that's under, if you want to, I sort of like it that way, but you can get used to either one. So that's under Edit, Preferences, User Performance. Sorry, yeah, Performance. Okay, Animated Zoom. Okay, in Photoshop it's called Scrubby Zoom. So when you're zoomed in, you need to be able to pan around. So you can go to the hand tool and just drag to pan around. Okay. I never actually go to the hand tool because I don't use really that many keyboard shortcuts, but this one's very convenient. If you just push down the space bar, it temporarily takes it to the hand tool. And in this case, the shortcut is actually better than going manually to the tool, because if you're using something, the space bar doesn't drop the tool you're using, but if you go to the hand tool, it does. So like, for example, if I'm drawing along with the pen tool here, maybe I should make my stroke a little bit skinnier. I guess because I'm zoomed in. If I'm going along with the pen tool, right, and then if I go to the hand tool to move, it dropped my line, right? But if I use the space bar, it didn't. Okay, so I like the space bar. To zoom out, you can just, if you're set to scrubby zoom, which now I'm not, let me get back to the normal way. You can just, zoom back out again. But what I normally do is double click on the hands button, not with it, but on it. And that takes you right back to finding your page filling the screen. It's the same as Edit's fit artboard in window. Okay. So, and also a lot of times people lose their artboard, like they do this somehow and push it off the screen and can't find it again. Just double click. This happens all the time. Just double click on the hand button and you'll find yourself back there again. That brings another thing to mind. There are scroll bars on the side of the page. Don't use these. Okay. If you just move them a little bit, they just shoot your whole page right off the screen, because they are sized not for your artboard at 8.5 by 11, but the entire possible size that you could work on in Illustrator, which is quite large. It's like, I don't know, 25 feet wide or something like that. So the scroll bars are scrolling across this whole thing. There's my little page way down there. So I would recommend not doing those. But it's so easy just to push the space bar down to pan around. Okay. Zoom tool to zoom in and out, or double click on the hand button, space bar to pan around. So that's navigation. A few other things related to navigation are found under View. And it's just some this and that. One thing that's worth pointing out is this thing called outline mode. Okay. If you get yourself in a situation, and students do a lot, and I think it's because the shortcut for this is Control Y, and they're trying to hit Control Z or something, and they hit Control Y by accident. If you find yourself in a situation where there's no fill and no stroke, and everything's just a thin black line, that means you're in outline mode. The color mode is called preview. Okay. Now, it's the reason it's called preview is very old school, but for a long time when Illustrator was first made, into the late 90s, I would say, you could only work in outline mode, and you could preview your work, but to actually do anything, you had to go back to outline mode. Okay, so it's outline and preview. They keep this here because it has some uses. A lot of times when you're working with Illustrator, you have a big pile of objects, particularly if you're rendering something. A lot of the shading might be made out of multiple stacked objects, and it can be really hard to select the thing you want. So one good thing about this preview mode, or sorry, outline mode, is you can select right through things and get the exact one you want. And also, without the fill and stroke on there, you see where the actual vectors are if you're trying to troubleshoot or fine tune something. You know, you can get in there and look at it in a more kind of technical way. But view, preview. All right, so that's colors and basic navigation.